Kavita, now I've got two tough acts to follow between Philippe and you, and I feel like the funeral anecdote that you mentioned, Philippe. Philippe, I thank you for your insightful and provocative remarks, which provide a great segue for me to begin my remarks here. As you've heard, I was the 17th Surgeon General of the United States, a position that is wonderful and on paper sounds pretty simple. For your job description is this: to protect, promote, and advance the health, safety, and security of the nation. However, when you try and execute on that value proposition in a very partisan environment, it does become a battlefield. Many of the issues that you all think about and work in your field, in spa, health, wellness, which seem very straightforward based on the science, often become some of the most divisive and ones that people are willing to stake their career or an election on. It's a tough position, and during your tenure, I would say I aged in dog years. It is a 7/24 relentless job, and there's no place else to pass the buck. For 4 years, I didn't have a day off. And I remember one day, I was sick. I had a bad case, a cold, bronchitis, I had a fever. And my wife says, well, why don't you just stay home? You never stay home. Take a day off. I said, who would I call? Who do I call into? I said, what do I do? Call the president and say I'm staying out today? It's just virtually impossible. And the job itself was best characterized to me by an encounter I had with Kavita's old boss early on as I was going to Senate confirmation. As you know, the president gives you the privilege to serve, but he only nominates you. It's actually the Congress that, through Senate confirmation, that allows you then to go on, if they so desire, to be the Surgeon General of the United States or any of the other high positions within government that require Senate confirmation. And I'd gone through my nomination. I was waiting for my, I had gone through the nomination process, waiting for my confirmation hearing. And as many of you know, everybody doesn't get a confirmation hearing. The way that Congress tells the president that they don't like the nominee is you don't get a hearing and you wait, you die on the list. Some people get a hearing, and after the hearing they wish they hadn't, because it's an embarrassing situation. And then I was fortunate, and after a few months of meeting with individual senators, I had my hearing. And the day I was going there, Senator Kennedy and a number of others that I'd met had really befriended me in a very nonpartisan way, reached out to me. And some of the best attributes you have going to Washington, especially to be Surgeon General, is to truly believe that you can go and stamp out disease and famine and pestilence and make the world a better place. And you wonder, why is it going to take 4 years? Maybe what will I do my last couple of years? And so that fateful day, I showed up at the Senate anteroom waiting to go out, and Senator Kennedy came out to talk to me. And he shook my hand and he said, Rich, I really thank you for willing to serve your country again, and all the usual accolades that go with the job. And I said, Senator, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity. Thank you. And he had his hand on my shoulder, and he was shaking with the other hand, and he was looking at me kind of like a dad who's sending off his kid to combat. And he said, I want to give you some advice. I said, Senator, any advice you can give me today that will help me through this confirmation would be greatly appreciated. He said, no, it's not going to help you today, but I think you'll get through today. But this information that I'll tell you will give you an idea of what you're getting into. So he spoke to me for about 5 minutes, and I said, Senator, it's 9 o'clock. We need to get into the hearing. He said, I'm the ranking member. They can't start without me. And then finally, he really looked at me in a very caring, loving fashion, and he said, Rich, you've heard this before, but you can't possibly understand it. I said, well, what is it, Senator? He said, Rich, when you come to Washington, if you want a friend, you need to bring a dog. And I said, Senator, I understand, Senator. And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, Richard, you're clueless. And I was. And several years later, I was on the Hill testifying at a hearing, and Surgeon Generals testify all the time on everything from A to Z, and terrorism, obesity, cardiovascular disease, early warning, preparedness issues. But this day was a terrorism meeting, and we were delayed, and I happened to start talking with the senators again, and I'm 3 years into my 4-year position. And I saw the senator, and I had a little chit-chat with him. We shared niceties about each other's family. And I said, hey, Senator, I really want to thank you again for how kind you were to me when I was going through the process to help me understand what I was getting into. He said, Rich, we're happy to have you back in uniform, serving your country. I said, no, Senator, I don't mean that. I mean your advice. And he said, you mean about the dog? I said, yes. He said, you understand now, don't you? I said, Senator, I do understand, but respectfully, I do disagree with you. He said, he was flabbergasted. He said, how could you disagree with me? I don't understand. I said, Senator, I've been here 3 years now. I'm a smart street kid. And it's come to my attention that when you come to Washington, you need to bring at least 2 dogs. and he said, well, I don't understand. Why is that? I said, because during your tenure, at least one of those dogs will turn on you. And he gave me a hug. He gave me a hug, and he said, that's better advice than I gave you. Can I use this from now on? So, as I have reviewed the conference proceeding of the years past, it is clear that these summits and the industry have continued to mature. Excuse me. World-class topics and speakers addressing all aspects of spa operations, from customizing, connecting, and personalizing services and experiences to creating unique environments and best business and clinical practice will be discussed in the next few days. Hence the dilemma for me and other speakers, because many of you are our peers, and for us to provide meaningful information that brings added value to all of you, that will inspire you when you go home to imagine new horizons, is tough, because you're out there thinking every day the reason you're here is the reason that you are the leader there. My goal today is to begin by briefly framing the U.S. and global health metrics that are at least partially defining the increasing demand for our spa industry globally, but also fueling demand for transformed health systems in the United States and worldwide. I hope to be provocative enough to stimulate your collective innovation genes through epigenetic propagation that results in all of us imagining a healthier, happier, more peaceful world that we can all create through our collective best practices in business, health, and social responsibility, while creating and perpetuating successful businesses. You know, as the U.S. government continues to debate healthcare and who pays, the rest of the world also struggles with right-sizing, fixing, and are creating delivery systems that are really sick care systems. They truly are not healthcare systems. As I tell you, the job of the Surgeon General is to protect, promote, and advance the health, safety, and the security of the United States. And this position, during my tenure and probably a little before, has morphed into a global position because, as Philippe outlined, so much of what I did, I recognized every day, was interdependent with so many others around the world. So it was incumbent upon me to know every other Surgeon General around the world, every other health minister, every other foreign leader, because everything is interconnected, as was pointed out in the diagram that Philippe showed us. Today we live in this world of 7 billion people, where 2 billion are living on less than $1 a day, where thousands of children die every day from lack of nutrition and lack of sanitation, lack of hydration, a world that has an increasing carbon footprint. And if you don't think the environment affects health, take a closer look, because it's directly involved, from everything from asthma to other diseases globally. I want to just give you a snapshot of the Surgeon General's portfolio and how that relates to us today and what we're talking about in health and wellness, and my vision, how I imagine the spa industry can be a major player in this space. As Surgeon General of the United States, you put together a portfolio, and it has to be based on the best evidence, the best science. My background, I've held a lot of positions throughout my life, and I was a trauma surgeon for many years. And one of those things that I learned most there is that as I admitted patients every day in the emergency room, the trauma center, largely because of people's bad behaviors on a daily basis or chronically, I started to see that 3 out of every 4 people I admitted didn't have to be there. It was that bad behavior. Either they ate the wrong foods, they became sedentary, they engaged in high-risk activities, domestic violence, drug deals, what we used to call the knife and gun club, shooting and stabbing each other. But when you look at the preventable disease and economic burden, it is astounding. And that kind of drove me into public health because of the experiences I had. and why it was important. So first and foremost in my portfolio was prevention. We live in a world today where about almost 500,000 people a year die in the United States from tobacco-related causes. Number one preventable cause of death in our country. Millions more suffer irreparable harm from various diseases, cancers, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and so on. This is not only a problem in the United States, it's actually even growing off our shores in other countries, especially in the EU, in Latin America, because we've tried to restrict advertising and try and contain tobacco, but the industry has moved offshore, and they're very, very successful in tobacco-related endeavors out there. We have an obesity epidemic in our country. We have 2 out of 3 Americans who are overweight or obese. We have 9 million children today that are overweight or obese, and the fact of the matter is obesity is the greatest accelerator of chronic disease that the world has ever known. If you're healthy, it will make you sick. If you're sick, it will make you sicker. Whether you're pregnant, whether you have asthma, whether you have cardiovascular disease, it will be worse. Depression, even psychological disease, is tied into obesity as well. Obesity is a national security problem. So when I was Surgeon General and tried to move this forward, because it's not only me, a lot of this information, and Philippe alluded to that too in his remarks, what we're dealing with today in crisis form, whether it's economics or health issues, have been there for a couple of decades. And we've kicked the can down the road. We've just ignored it. We've lived beyond our means. We've gone into debt. We've transferred debt to our children, to our grandchildren, and now we're paying the price as if it was done acutely. But if you look back carefully, all of the signs were there for decades in any of the spheres that we speak about, economics, health, and so on, and they're interconnected. And so as I looked at this prevention agenda, and we look at tobacco and then obesity, and we look at the challenges, as I said, a national security problem, the only way I could get traction within the media, health doesn't sell very well, as many of you know, for health itself. My colleagues in the U.S. Public Health Service, Army, Navy, and Air Force that I work with as Surgeon General of the United States, we desperately try to move these health issues forward. But when 2 wars are going on and you're post 9/11 anthrax attacks, that's all the media. That's where all the money's going. So you have to be smarter. So instead of just selling science of obesity, what we had to do was say, hey guys, listen, obesity is a national security problem. And people look at you at the press conference and say, is he smoking something? Well, what is it's on his mind? Well, guys, the number one reason that we fail to keep soldiers and sailors and airmen on active duty is obesity. They can't pass their PT test and they get sick, and we send them home after we spend your tax dollars to educate them, but now they can't perform anymore, okay? And at a time when we're fighting 2 wars and we're struggling because of multiple deployments to get more kids involved, we can't. Do you know now that the United States Army has a pre-boot camp for obese kids to get them in shape so that they can go to basic training? That's how bad the situation is in our country. It is devastating. It's dwarfing us. Between tobacco and obesity, we're up near $500 billion a year, totally preventable in our country. It's extraordinary. After prevention is preparedness issues, and the fact is that after 9/11 and the 2 wars and everything we're doing, preparedness issues become very important. Having to be partially responsible for training our first responders as well as educating the public to the new world order of terrorism, weapons of mass destruction. But you know what? An unhealthy society becomes a liability in preparedness. So there you connect again. Health connects with preparedness. So we saw it in Katrina. When Katrina hit in the most health disparate area in our United States, and we had to go down there and in effect create an infrastructure because police, fire, EMS, records were gone, hospitals were underwater, there was no connectivity, no communication, and we had thousands and thousands of infirm, health illiterate people who depended on others for their daily life and their medications, and now it was gone. So instead of becoming potentially assets in a rescue operation, we had to evacuate 300,000 people to 3 cities in Texas where we set up stadium cities, stadium health cities, because of how bad the health status was and the low level of literacy in health. So preparedness becomes intersected with health every day. Prevention, preparedness, health disparities. We are a nation where we're divided by our health metrics. If you're African American, Hispanic American, Native American, or a low socioeconomic class, you will get less health care. Lesser decisions will be made on your behalf. You'll die sooner and cost society more money. And this is in the greatest, richest nation of the world. Now, when I used to argue this, and people, you have some hardliners, tell those people to get a job, no more welfare. I said, look, even if you're heartless, let me make the business case for you. We're all paying for those health disparities, okay? So we all ought to do something. Even if you don't care, you don't feel it's a moral, ethical, or legal obligation, do it because you don't want to spend money. The cost is shifted for all of those populations who are underserved, who have bad disease, who are not treated, 50 million who are uninsured. Eventually, we all pay. So we should be smart and invest up front in health and wellness, and hence the importance of my pitch to you today. Prevention, preparedness, health disparities, health literacy is the currency we all need every day. Because health literacy is about understanding that those we have the privilege to serve globally all see the world through a different lens. They all understand health and wealth and dying and disability differently. Our job is to take the best science the world has ever known, translate it in a culturally competent, health literate manner, deliver it to an end user to do what? Effect sustainable behavioral change. That's the equation. Deceivingly simple. It's what any of you are going to do in your spas. You bring people in, you want to have a wonderful experience, but you want to transform them. You want to make them healthier. You want them to come back. It's about translating the complex stuff that we know that gets more complex every day to those people who desperately need it, especially these health disparate populations. So prevention, preparedness, health disparities, health literacy, it's a tool that we all have to become expert in. I spent a lot of time in health diplomacy and global health for reasons that a perfect segue from what Philippe said. We are all interconnected. The child with AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa, and there are 12 million of them now that are orphans, are vectors for disease. Okay? So if you don't have the humanistic approach, if you don't have a heart to reach out and try to do what's better for everybody, the fact is that there's an economic argument to be made to extinguish disease, to help those populations that are struggling, because ultimately they are harborers of many diseases, and AIDS is a perfect example. So health diplomacy is really important, because health itself is not only a tool to be able to affect health, but think about it. If you can go into underserved communities and create healthy populations, what follows is economic development. What follows is a sustainable society. What follows is less opportunity for people to lash out at us through terrorism because of asymmetries. Those asymmetries we see globally: health, wealth, ideology, theology, and poor governance. All of them are the platform for terrorism. But we found that by soft projection of health into the disparate global communities that could be a threat to us, it does the right thing, but bringing health can bring peace and stability and economic development. And it was interesting, the remarks I heard with the opening about no women in that first brochure that you mentioned. And yet, when we look at all the data around the world, 80% of our decisions, especially in health, are made by women. It's extraordinary. And when we look at the microloans in some of these small villages in the middle of nowhere, when we look at the health challenges we faced after the tsunami in Indonesia, the most powerful group that we dealt with were the women in those villages who had the potential to transform culture and have them see Americans there really as allies and not adversaries. And we were able to change how some of those communities which harbored terrorists before saw us differently, because we used health as a tool, not only for health itself, but for economic development, as well as to bring peace and stability to very unstable regions. So where are the thoughts? One other thing I want to mention as I travel the world, which is really important because we want to keep our remarks globally. As Surgeon General, and then since then in business and many things I do, the hats I wear like all of you, we spend in our country almost 18% of our GDP on what we call healthcare, and it's really sick care. 3/4 of that, 75 cents of every dollar we spend in this country on what we call healthcare, are spent on chronic diseases, most of which are preventable. Again, this is a value proposition for what we do in our industry in pursuing optimal health and wellness, which we don't hear coming from government, where the battle is over who pays. The fact is we're all going to pay. The cost curve is going this way, and if we don't do something in the next few years, we'll be over 20% of our GDP, $5.5 trillion. The bank is breaking now, and in the next decade it'll double if we don't put our nation and the world on a different trajectory because of the disease and economic burden that is developing because of these problems. Now in Japan, I met with the health ministers and the ministers there a few years ago, and they called me in, and I remember being up in the minister's office, and we were looking out the window in Tokyo, and he says to me, Surgeon General, we are having problems. I said, what problem is that? He said, respectfully, we are Americanizing. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we looking out in the street. He said, look down the street. And it was funny, as I looked down the street, you saw all our U.S. fast food restaurants down from the window. And not that I'm blaming them, but he said, your music, your clothes, the activities, everybody wants to be like America, and that's good, but they're also inheriting some of the bad characteristics, and they're spending half of what we spend, and they're going broke now, okay, in Japan. And when I went to the UAE, one of the biggest problems they had, obesity epidemic that's drowning them, okay? And when I went to India, same thing. So you start to see this is really a global phenomenon. We're all interconnected, and the solutions are global. As Philippe mentioned, it's not about solving it in Aspen. It's not about solving it in Tucson, Arizona. It's not, all right? These are all global issues because we are all inextricably interconnected with so many other people. So where are the thought leaders who can drive health and wellness globally? Who has the expertise and proven ability to transform ailing individuals and population? Who understands that the optimal approach to health and wellness is via integrated and holistic approaches to mind, body, and spirit? Where does a global infrastructure already exist to begin a global transformation to a true healthcare system and away from perversely incentivized sick care systems? Ladies and gentlemen, I maintain it's really all of you, because you already have a global network with the spa industry. You all have a similar value proposition. At this juncture, it's worthwhile stating the obvious. We have a branding issue, of course, in the spa world. For the word spa has morphed over generations to be used so liberally that it may be used to describe a small boutique hotel with a jacuzzi and an on-call masseuse, to comprehensive, integrated, holistic immersion destinations for health and wellness resorts that provide every modality from acupuncture to Zen and everything in between. Be that as it may, let's look at what we have in common, not how we're different. Because we have lots in common, since we are all about transformative, enlightening, provocative, delightful experiences for our guests that propel each guest on a desired or newfound health journey that presumptively continues as they return home, and of course, hopefully results in a return visit. That also meets our commercial needs. Competition drives excellence and breeds innovation and entrepreneurialism, especially in these economically challenging times. As we strive to chase and define the ever-evolving holy grail of added value that drives our guests to us and fuels our business, it is the IP we invent and or use that defines our brand and keeps us competitive in this increasingly tough spa market. 4 years ago, shortly after finishing my term as United States Surgeon General and joining my present company as the Vice Chairman and President of the Institute, Susie and Pete were kind enough to invite me to give a keynote address at the Global Summit in New York City. At that time, I addressed my thoughts on the spa industry and how I believed it could play a critical and essential role in transforming our nation and the world to a culture of pursuing optimal health and wellness for all, and in doing so, build brand recognition, enhance our bottom line, while providing innovative health solutions in a socially responsible and environmentally sustainable and sensitive way. Truly a win-win for all parties involved. I also briefed you on an innovative concept of starting an institute, a nonprofit aligned with our for-profit business, whose mission was and is to partner with health thought leaders globally to deliver our company's intellectual property to underserved, health disparate communities who often need our health and wellness services more than those who can afford to be our guests. Since that presentation 4 years ago, we have developed over a dozen partnerships, reached numerous public and private communities. We've presented at public and private meetings and had peer review publications, developed a sustainable business model, and have demonstrated that we can create sustainable behavioral change resulting in improved health via the culturally competent, health literate translation of our IP to the neediest health disparate communities. Essentially, we're taking the spa to the hood. Now, in the spirit of collaboration and the spirit of, staying away from branding and names, I haven't mentioned anything specific, but I want to make sure that, for Pete and Susie, I'm happy to share this information with all of you. We have a website, it's online, and our goal is to get it out to everybody so that all of you can use that information to address these issues in your community if you're able to. So we have a proof of concept now that seems to be working, and we want to share it with all of you. Again, and it's readily available online, curriculum and everything. So if any of you are interested, I'm happy to discuss it with you later, or you can get to us online. But I didn't want this to just be a hollow presentation where you don't know where anything is. The pursuit of optimal health and wellness is a global megatrend that cuts across all demographics. When we look at health in the US over the last century, the changes are startling. At the beginning of the 20th century, the life expectancy of the average person was 48 years old, and most people died of an infectious disease. Now we're pushing 80. At the beginning of the century, only 14% of homes had bathtubs, only 8% of homes had phones. There were 8,000 cars in total in the United States, and there were only 144 miles of paved roads in the whole United States. The maximum speed limit was 10 miles per hour. The average wage was $200 to $400 per year. Only 6% of adults had a high school diploma. Marijuana, heroin, and cocaine were over-the-counter products. No applause, so don't. Germ theory was still new, and DNA, the double helix, was still a half a century away. What will our comprehensive health and spa of the future look like in 50 years or more? Let's briefly look at a hypothetical. Our hypothetical CEO is a hard-charging, stressed-out 60-year-old Fortune 100 CEO with more money than he can count and a life expectancy that is shrinking every day due to his family history, his lifestyle, and his inability to change his behaviors. His primary care provider suggests a last chance to go to a health spa near his community that is aligned with his assigned medical home. The medical home is among the best accountable care organizations nationally, based on quality, cost, access, and best practices in sustainable health. Providers are rewarded for keeping individual and communities and populations healthy. There are few emergencies in this community. Mr. CEO leans back in his chair and via his all-purpose glasses telepathically activates his search engine on the virtual heads-up display. He contacts the spa nurse and program advising, and she requests access to his personal medical record stored in the cloud HealthVault. She reviews the record and requests permission to assess his vital signs. She does so via the temporal transcutaneous sensors on his all-purpose glasses and performs an EEG, EKG, and total body energy vector analysis, which reveals significant asymmetries that require further evaluation and treatment. She schedules him to arrive at the spa the next day for a week's stay. Mr. CEO, with the help of the program advising nurse who was holographically present via his all-purpose heads-up glasses display, schedules numerous fun and healthy activities, classes, and an executive physical to be interspersed within his activities during the week. He has been sleep deprived, and psychometric testing reveals cognitive and physical performance decrement. A remote virtual mini functional MRI reveals circuitry overload, diminished neuroplasticity, and neurotransmitter depletion, which says he must rest. A history, physical examination, basic labs, biomarkers, genomic profile, and epigenomic status reveal further problems, all correctable by behavioral change. Mr. CEO goes back to his room to rest after receiving a comprehensive prescription for health and wellness to include diet, activity recommendations, sleep cycle, and a pharmacogenomic profile so he can adjust his daily medication precisely based on his genomic profile. However, his epigenetic profile is poor due to poor eating habits, smoking, stress, and sedentary behavior, thus preventing him from expressing positively his genome. Before nodding off, he decides to have a prohibited cigarette, some candy bars he stashed away, and a beer. The environmental room sensors and the sensors on his glasses detect smoke. He also automatically had his snack choices scanned into his HealthVault when the packages were opened and the bottle cap removed. His all-purpose glasses automatically put up a holographic image of the Surgeon General stating, "These activities will be hazardous to your health." As Mr. CEO dozes off, he contacts his wife, who is overseas, by scrolling up her unique identifier on his eyeglasses heads-up display. She appears holographically and gives him a goodnight virtual hug and kiss. Can't do much more yet holographically. In the AM, Mr. CEO arises. He goes to relieve himself in the waste reclamation room. Used to be called a bathroom. All of his body waste is analyzed. Hydration status, electrolytes, labs, and there's a continuous feedback to the HealthVault in the cloud where his medical record is, so that his providers and all of the specialists at the spa can act accordingly based on the information that's continually generated and available through the HealthVault in the cloud. All of these things that almost seems Jules Verne's-like are available today. This is science that it's available that has not been applied yet. When Mr. CEO leaves after a week with his comprehensive and multidisciplinary prescription for health, he also chose to stay connected remotely to the virtual spa, where through his choice of PDA, he is monitored daily and reminded of his needed daily activities, eating, sleep cycle, calorie count, and automated lab results that are done remotely as needed via transcutaneous sensors on his glasses. And by the way, until his next physical visit to the spa, he is able to virtually participate in his favorite exercise classes, lectures, and even have professional consultation as needed, all done virtually, telemedicine, and through his choice of PDA, and all health info is immediately downloaded into his record in the cloud. The virtual spa concept has been an enormous success for our membership and is now in the millions of satisfied guests who belong to the virtual spa health community. In fact, the revenue from our virtual spa, from member fees and associated virtual supermarket for branded food and clothes sales, continues to dwarf the old-fashioned bricks and mortar spa. The traditional medical community, medical homes, and ACOs, accountable care organizations, are immensely pleased with our participation in pursuing and being part of the health community, whose role is to pursue optimal health and wellness in all we do. And of course, our investors continue to be elated at the ROI, another win-win situation for all. As U.S. Surgeon General, it was always clear to me that the best innovation and entrepreneurial practices emulate not from government, but from thought leaders like you in the private sector. The greatest successes my team and I achieved on behalf of the American public and at times the world were based on public-private partnerships with passionate, knowledgeable, innovative, imaginative, socially responsible leaders like you who are not politically encumbered and could act on market forces in a timely fashion. In all of you, I see the power of possibility to transform our nation and world through your best practices at all levels of society, to engender a national and global cultural transformation from a sick care system to a healthcare system that embraces the pursuit of optimal health and wellness via an integrated, holistic approach, emphasizing the best scientifically vetted practices of mind, body, and spirit. We can drive and shape health policy through our clinical and business best practices. I challenge you, as I did 4 years ago, you and your individual companies in the collective industry with its growing infrastructure, such as this summit. Your business successes, if collectively leveraged for maximal public good while being commercially viable and where possibly philanthropically successful, have the potential to incrementally improve the health and wellness status of a nation and the globe that is in desperate need of scientifically driven, nonpartisan leadership. I would encourage the spa industry to develop a global health and wellness policy platform that will allow you to speak as one, and in doing so, move our nation and the world on a most desirable and needed sustainable path of optimal health and wellness. In closing, I paraphrase Winston Churchill. And I love the quote. It's longer than I'm going to say, but I paraphrase it. And he said after the Second World War, I love Americans. They always do the right thing, eventually. And eventually is now, folks. We can't kick the can down the road anymore. And the spa industry, I believe, is an integral part of the solution for our nation and the world. Thank you.
So let's just thank you so much for that. I think you challenged us, and I think a lot of folks are not only very interested in your experience from being Surgeon General, but also maybe if you can reflect a bit on this pathway that you've been embarking on with running for national office, and how you might plan to operationalize, if you can just briefly touch on taking some of what you gave us for vision and how you think that can apply into a system that a lot of folks have felt is primarily broken, and that's our national political structure.
Well, certainly I will give credit to Kavita starting out. Many of you don't know that she has been a quiet, humble giant behind the scenes formulating health policy in a very partisan environment. So we're fortunate to have Kavita and folks like her that I had an opportunity to work with in Washington, who always stayed focused on what the best interest of the person was and the population, not a party. And because of that, we had some very strong bonds, because as Surgeon General, you realize you're not the doctor of the Republican or the Democratic Party. You have a far more important job. You're the doctor of the people of the United States. And your decision should be based on the best science that will help people make their own decisions as they move forward. So my sanity has been questioned routinely in the last couple of months since doing this. It's something I did not plan to do. In fact, I often said I would not go back to Washington. And it's just such a contentious environment. The experience of being Surgeon General was extraordinary, and I still consider it a gift. But when I got home and I immersed myself in the world of doing all the things I do with multiple hats and sitting on boards and traveling, I was very happy. But I wasn't happy with the political situation in my state, in Arizona, nor what I saw happening from Congress. You know, pretty much an absence of leadership, gridlock, all of the things that you know, being pushed to the brink of a debt crisis, embarrassing ourselves in front of the rest of the world because we couldn't solve problems. And as has been pointed out in my presentation and Philippe's, we're all inextricably interconnected. The fact that our nation fails to act in a timely fashion on economic catastrophic issues affects everybody. And so a lot of our colleagues encouraged me. They said, the first call, well, not the first, but a few days into it, somebody called me and said, Rich, you really ought to run for office. And I said, I am running. I'm running as far away from Washington as I can. But after several months of discussion and a lot of due diligence and speaking to former presidents, majority leaders, minority leaders, people like I and Kavita have developed a relationship with that is apolitical because of how we approach things, I realized that it was another opportunity to serve, and that maybe with the insight and background that I have, that I will be able to engender some civility in our governance at our national level, maybe return trust to the people of their governance. And as you know, 90% of the people have no confidence in their government at this point. And you can't run a democracy when the people don't trust their elected officials because of repeated breaches of fiduciary responsibility and other problems. So I figure I look at it as if the people give me the privilege to serve, I'll just look at it as going back on active duty. I'll serve, and my goal will always be to come home at the end of the term and just work hard while I'm there and hopefully become a positively disruptive force in that body to engender the change that's needed to serve all of you in a professional manner with integrity and dignity.
Thank you. So let me shift for a bit. There were several questions from the audience based on your wonderful kind of vision of this CEO and this integration. But where is the role in that? As you were describing that and you're talking about the advanced technology, where is the role again for human touch and personal communication?
Well, I think the most important issue, we're not going to lose the human touch, but we're going to enhance the touch, and some of it can be virtually. The challenge we have today is we all know, we in the professional field know, that the arguments that are there before us in our government over who pays really are almost distractions. The real issue you have to look at is, what does the data show us? The data shows us that we have a mounting disease and economic burden that is burying us. And we have the power to change that. The challenge for us is we have to be able to connect with each and every American, because it's not about the government writing a paper or the Surgeon General giving a speech. It's about engaging every single person in the country, that they have a personal responsibility to pursue optimal health and wellness. The government can help you. We can set up the platform. We can make sure you have access. We can make sure you have the health care. But it can't be the traditional sick care system. We have to provide different methods, and they're being studied now in pilots, on how to incentivize providers to keep you healthy. The health system we see in the future, and I know Kavita agrees with me, is that I want to maximally be able to incentivize those practitioners who keep individuals, families, and communities healthy. Not to say that those that take care of disease don't get paid, but we really need to move our perversely incentivized society to one that embraces health and wellness. And that's where I see the spa organizations can really help, because look, there are 40 different countries here. This is a global issue, first of all. It's not US. And we already have the intellectual property. You practice it every day. Health, wellness, physical activity, diet. Those are the variables that need to be applied to each and every person in this global economy. The challenges we face as a nation don't recognize geopolitical borders. Obesity, cardiovascular disease, or terrorism, or weapons of mass destruction. Okay, so we are trying to figure out now, how do we deal with borders that they don't impede commerce, but yet protect us, that they don't impede health, but they do often. So these are issues that have to be debated, and in my sense, is in a nonpartisan way. And I still see that the spa industry has this wonderful organization globally. It's growing every year. It's getting stronger. Susie and Pete have done a tremendous job in bringing together thought leaders here. You know, Philippe has done a great job with his opening. I mean, the platform is set. I just think we need to imagine a different world that we get to drive the policy for, based on our best practices. And we can do that. We can do that because the government here and government elsewhere is looking for solutions to their problems. The solutions are not who pays. The solutions are what you do every day. And we have to get that to all the people. And you, not only commercially, but that's why I mentioned the Institute, which we've been fortunate enough to be able to partner in over a dozen different communities and actually start to transform the health of the most health disparate communities globally, because we have a global project now in Lima, Peru.
So there are a number of comments from a lot of folks in the audience. I've had an overwhelming number around how to take this vision that you're describing, as well as this notion of integrative medicine, whether you want to call it complementary, alternative, or integrative medicine, holistically, and where there is some opposition from the pharmaceutical industry, as well as some of the very large and well-funded kind of financial interests across the world that we're seeing. How do you resolve those issues and give advice to folks in the audience?
Well, I would say, Kavita, like we always did, you know, we try and be nonpartisan, sell the science. The fact that we move down a road toward pursuing optimal health and wellness doesn't have to be a challenge to the pharmaceutical industry or other vested interests. Hospitals, they need to evolve to the New World Order themselves, and we're seeing that happen already. The fact is, the healthcare system that we've set up that is really based on a post-World War II Hill-Burton model, which has maldistribution of most of our resources, including hospitals, doesn't make any sense anymore. We need to start recreating and creating these, what my colleagues call medical homes. I tend to call them health homes because I don't want to replicate what we had. Mm-hmm. I want a center where people can be healthy. So the fact is that this is all doable. We have the intellectual property. You guys do this stuff every single day. And we have to remember that it's not only reaching the people that have the privilege to come to all of our places, but it's really, when we can, partnering with the communities to be able to bring some of that good health into those communities and transform some of those health disparate people. It's a brand elevator for you. It helps you with the government. You're solving problems of local communities, and it makes you a much more viable community servant. So there's lots of reasons to do it, but especially it's the right thing to do.
Great, thank you. And then one final, this is very much in the spirit of Aspen, as those of you who have attended events at Aspen can tell you. If you can just tell us something from something outside of our comfort areas, outside of wellness, outside of healthcare, that you've seen, whether it's your experience in Peru or just experience in life, that would help us understand how to do what we're struggling with every day. So I often look to physics, education, areas that are completely outside of my comfort zone. Have you found such an example that you could share on a final note with others?
Yeah, there's a number. I gave you the concept of health diplomacy.
Right. Okay,
so whether you practice, health diplomacy is projecting the science, technology, health we have out. In the military, we have a concept called force projection. So we show our strength by putting all the battleships and troops on the ground. So it's a deterrent to war. That's the theory. But soft projection is taking health and science and technology in a prospective manner to extinguish the asymmetries that I spoke about. And I know that when we had the tsunami, and of course, America tends to be the world's rescuer, the world's doctor, the world's policeman. But as soon as it happened, my colleagues and I were saying, what are we going to do? Those people are dying in Indonesia. They're underwater. It's a developing country. They're struggling. And yet, we didn't have the best relations with them. It was one of the countries singled out as harboring terrorists. So we're walking a fine line politically. So this was really an emancipating moment for me, because as we sent our Navy ships forward with public health, Army, Air Force, Coast Guard, Peace Corps, USAID, just to do good things for people who were struggling, we stopped at the international waterline, and the leaders were like, well, we don't trust you. We don't want you here. And there was this discussion. So our guys were smart. They bartered. They said, look, we're in uniform. We don't have weapons. We have sanitary engineers. We want to rebuild your communities. We want to provide you clean water. We want to take care of the kids and the injured. We want to provide nutrition. So they were able to go on land 2 hours a day, guarded by police and military. And then we'd have to helicopter them back to the boat, which delayed our rescue mission. But over days and over weeks, they were there for 4 hours. And then they were there for 8 hours. And then they were invited to stay in the village at night, and they learned the kids' names, and they learned the family names. And miraculously, after a few weeks, there were no more guards, and they were living in the villages with the people doing the work. And when it was time for us to end the event, because we were not funded for it, we were broke, and we spoke to the leadership and said, we're going to have to pull out now. I think you're relatively stable. We'll continue to try and provide assistance. And you know what the leadership said from the country? Why are they leaving? These are good people. We'd like them to stay. So in a very short time, we delivered the heart of America. We actually changed how a foreign country saw us through using and leveraging the currency of health to engender a transformation in that community, both for us and them, and hopefully then breed peace, prosperity, and economic development to follow.
Thank you. And on that note, join me in thanking what I hope will be
Thanks for being here.